But I think we'll get started now. Welcome, everybody. I'm Janelle Tischer, First Vice President of the Adcraft Club of Detroit and the Vice President of Category Solutions at the Walt Disney Company. On behalf of the entire Adcraft Board of Directors, thank you for your support. At 114 years old, Adcraft is the oldest association in the country. We've remained a vital part of Detroit's marketing community because of members like you. We're certainly proud of our heritage and definitely the envy of many clubs across the United States. As a nonprofit, we rely on the support of our members. So when you get your renewal for your annual membership, please make sure that you renew. If you're not an Adcraft member, we hope you'll consider joining us. It takes only a few minutes to sign up at adcraft.org. We offer many professional development events like today, along with networking and social events. Again, please sign up if you haven't already. We're really excited for today's program. As a Disney cast member, it's my great pleasure to introduce our two panelists and fellow cast members of our Tuesday Talk, ESPN's Clinton Yates and Kelley Carter.
Hi. I talk loud, and I talk a lot, so hi.
Hello, let me give a little bit of kind of background for you both. So Kelley is an award-winning entertainment and pop culture journalist. She's a senior entertainment writer who helped launch ESPN's The Undefeated that highlights the intersection of sports, race, and culture. She hosts the Undefeated digital series, Another Act with Kelley Carter, giving viewers direct access in today's Hollywood's biggest stars. She's served as a special commentator for the Oscars Red Carpet Countdown, a native Detroiter, and a Michigan State Spartan. She is one of the leading entertainment journalists in the country and serves as chair as the NABJ Arts and Entertainment Task Force. And she's certainly been recognized for her efforts to that organization and the craft of journalism. Also joining us today is Clinton Yates, columnist, TV commentator, and host for ESPN. He is also a member of the editorial team that helped launch The Undefeated. He's a panelist on Around the Horn and also a panelist on Outside the Line, frequent contributor and guest host on ESPN's E60, and he also appears on SportsCenter and ESPN Radio. He is a Washington, D.C. native and an alumni of Miami of Ohio.
I'm the loudmouth. He's the genius. That's how this works.
Wow. Well, we are starting off strong here. Kelley, welcome back to Motown, and Clinton, welcome back to the Midwest. We're obviously really excited to talk to you guys today. The enthusiasm is clearly palpable. Here you're joining top marketers and ad professionals as also members of our Adcraft community, as you heard me talk about. We're going to spend the next probably 45 minutes or so talking about your journey, your passion for journalism, and really use that as kind of a catalyst to inspire those who are joining us today. So I talked a little bit about both of you are very accomplished and you wear a lot of hats at ESPN. The journey to success it's not always a straight road. So sometimes we move horizontal before we move forward and up. We'll kick off our discussion today talking about the journeys that you guys have both taken and really what's led you to where you are right now at ESPN. So Kelley, you started out at the Free Press. You had many high-profile stops along the way, the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, Ebony, BuzzFeed, and then ESPN. Can you walk us through your path?
Yeah, so what up, though, Detroit? I miss you guys so much, and I'm really happy to be here. So I started out, I went to high school in Lathrop Village, and then I went to Michigan State. And when I was at Michigan State, I went there because the journalism school is the best in the nation, but at the time was top 3 in the nation. And the first thing that I really kind of learned when I got there was that, journalism is a discipline that real world experience really is what amplifies you and what gets you the jobs and puts you on the path to having a great career. And I learned that through, the students that were a little bit older and had already started matriculating through the J school system. And so I did internships everywhere. I did internships at the Flint Journal. That was my first one in Flint, Michigan. Then I went to Florida, the St. Pete Times. Then went to Minneapolis, to the Star Tribune. And before I graduated college at Michigan State, I had a job waiting for me at the Free Press post that internship. So I came back to Detroit, and it was at a really transformative time, for the city. I mean, I remember one of my first days on the job, front page news on the Free Press was that Detroit was getting a Starbucks, and it was the Starbucks on East Jefferson, and it was front page news. And that was really, when you look back at it, especially, and you see all of the development that's happened in Detroit since then, that was really the beginning of all the things that we see, you know, that are taking place, especially in that downtown and East Jefferson district today. And so not only was that happening, but I also got there right before this crazy dude named Marshall Mathers was signed to Dr. Dre's label, and that of course would be Eminem. And so, you know, Detroit had not had a national music presence since Motown. And then Eminem gets signed, and all of a sudden everyone is interested in the Detroit hip hop scene with D12 and St. Clown Posse, Esham, and so on and so forth. And so as an entertainment reporter, that I was tasked with that. Those were some of my first assignments, really doing that. And then I remember when Detroit got the Super Bowl bid, you know, there was this kind of rush to get everything together so that Detroit presented better than I think the reputation that we had had in the aftermath of the riots had done for us. And so it was a really exciting time to be in Detroit. And I stayed in Detroit for a little bit longer than I think I had even anticipated, because it was such an exciting time to be a part of really this renaissance of a city that my mother and, you know, is from and was born in and grew up in. And so I begrudgingly left Detroit because I knew I had to in order to really accomplish some of the things I wanted to do. And I went to Chicago because I wanted to learn how to cover Hollywood. And when I got to Chicago, as I often kind of tell people, that's really when we started seeing some of those transitions in newspaper journalism start to happen. And that was the first time I was seeing my friends being laid off. And I started thinking, like, what would I do if I got laid off in Chicago? I came to Chicago to work for the Tribune, not to necessarily live in Chicago. And before I could really think about what that looked like, I got a call from USA Today to come out to LA and start to cover Hollywood. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. And I did that. I was laid off from USA Today after about a year and a half of working there, and then, you know, became an accidental freelancer where I started doing a lot of networks, talking head, you know, kind of jobs, and also writing for magazines. I was writing a lot of magazine cover stories, and that really kind of helped develop this specialty that I think I kind of have now in covering disenfranchised, I think, groups inside of Hollywood. Black people, women, people of color, generally speaking. And it just really kind of catapulted, you know, from there, and ended up, you know, with me at ESPN, really creating a job for myself because I'm an entertainment reporter at a sports network. But it's been great. And I really love that I get to do this here.
It's great. We're going to dig in a little bit more to that. I want to get Clinton's take. You know, you started your career a little bit more on the East Coast, so Washington Post, and spent many years there before you led yourself to ESPN. Talk about going home and after college and the journey that has led you to where you are today.
So the reason I called Kelley the genius and me the loudmouth is because my path is not nearly as smooth and kind and smart. I just started showing up yelling at people. But you let me do this. And they were like, you serious? And I was like, maybe. And they were like, okay, we'll give it a shot. So that's kind of how my journalism career started. I was a radio guy to start things off. I like to talk. I thought it was fun to show up and hang out with people and kick it and talk trash and give away prizes. And I understood the value of that in terms of how it connected to the community. What I did not realize is that my writing skill was going to be something that, just as a personal ability, was going to contribute to a lot of other things. I didn't know I could write until somebody asked me to write. And when I figured that out, I was like, oh, I can write these things, I can do all these other things. So in college, that's how that went, is that I was just a dude that was trying to run my mouth and talk about sports and talk about, you know, music and movies and stuff, you know, as best as I saw fit. And people started asking me to write about things because they liked the way that I talked. And so what I tried to do from that point, and I'm piggybacking off Kelley a little bit here in terms of, like, when you see something that makes sense to try to do, you say, oh, okay, well, thank you for opening that door. And for me, it was, well, you can write and you can talk. Maybe you should figure out this camera thing for a little bit. And I was not that comfortable with it to begin with. Quite frankly, I never wanted to be on TV. That was not the goal. You know what I'm saying? I was trying to run my mouth and write something that would have my name in the paper so that people around my town in DC when I got home would pay attention to me. That was a big deal. You have to understand that DC at the time was going through, not dissimilar to Detroit, you know, a gentrification phase that was in no way is impossible to ignore. And you know, that's where I'm from. That's my city. And so what I spent a lot of time doing was developing my voice as the person describing everything everybody else was seeing who was either coming to town or leaving town, in terms of what all these buildings look like, the entire visual vocabulary of the city, and what it all meant. Because that's where I grew up, you know. And I didn't really have, and I say this in all credit to Kelley, I didn't have those kind of journalistic chops. I was just showing up, you know, describing what I saw and explaining to people why what I saw made sense versus what they might have seen. And I just did my best to use my eye as a person from where I'm from, as a reasonably observant person, to, you know, tell the stories. And I started through that, ended up back at DC at Express, where I was the local news editor, at a free daily on the train, you know, and basically it was my job to pick the stories that mattered every day in my city to people that otherwise were not going to care. And that was a huge, huge responsibility to me. And it was a huge honor. After a while, I started writing a newsletter. Then Twitter came out. That was awesome. And between Twitter and Twitter, they were like, yo, man, you're pretty good. Do you want to write a column? And I was like, sure. So I started writing about my city. Next thing you know, the sports desk has an opening that opens up. I tweeted a lot about sports. I find myself there. It all dovetailed well. And then our close personal friend Kevin calls us, and Kelley and I end up sitting in the same room, wondering what we're going to do for the next 4 or 5 years. And now we're here. That's how that happened.
Full circle. So you both talked about really kind of leaving where you were to go and launch the Undefeated. So certainly launching a new product, be it, you know, here we've got a lot of the folks on the call either have experience launching a new creative campaign or a new vehicle launch. You obviously get a lot of learning experience and really learn about both yourself personally and professionally. Can you talk about that process of developing this new platform for Disney and how it's influenced your work today?
Kelley, if I may go first here, one of the things that I'll say is that, you know, and I don't want to speak out of school here, but, you know, I mean, the Undefeated had a start and then it had another start. And as somebody that was part of the second start, you know, I don't know how well this cultural reference is going to go over for you all, but this is what I used to say at the time, is that if you watch The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, you remember that Viv changed. Like, it was a different woman in that second part. It was a different human, but it also made it a different character. And I feel like that's where we were coming in on that second part in terms of what the Undefeated was trying to do. We had to figure out how to be a different character. We weren't any less Aunt Viv. We weren't any less Bel-Air. You know what I'm saying? But we were just a different person in that space. And I think that that was something that when you launch a new product, it's very easy to get caught up in what you think you should be versus what other people want you to be versus what you are. And managing those three things, I think, is the hardest part of the battle, you know, because I remember in those early days, you know, I have ideas, Kelley's got ideas, all sorts of people got ideas. People want to do a lot of things, but what works, what's doable, and what lands are all three different things. And I feel like that's kind of the hardest part about launching new products, is that you've got to find a way to regulate what the relationship is between all three of those things. Otherwise, you're going to fail in all of them. You know, as opposed to being able to execute one, even if the one that you execute as a team is not what everybody wants, it's not always the easiest. And I feel like, you know, for myself, I know the lane I was trying to get into, which was just, you know, me being me. Kelley had her lane in terms of entertainment and had a good lockdown on that. So that was a good anchor for what we were doing in that space. And those are the kind of things that you have to have if you're building something. People who, even if they don't necessarily consider themselves experts or whatever, they know what they want to do. And that's something I think the Undefeated takes a lot of pride in. We knew what we wanted to do, even if we didn't necessarily know how to get there. And I think we've done a pretty good job getting there.
I would 1,000% agree with what Clinton said. You know, I also feel like we had so many kind of pre-launch sessions, you know, talking about what the tone of the Undefeated would be and what it is we were tasked to do and what we would do. And I think, you know, pretty much like Clinton said, and as we discovered, once we got into the weeds of it, it became like its own thing. And it evolved to probably even things, and we've gone places that even we didn't think we would be able, you know, to go. I mean, in the first year of our launch, we had a Sports Center special with President Obama on, and I don't know if any of us were that ambitious to think we would be producing content like that and doing pieces like Serena and Kama and having a conversation, you know, on ESPN about race and culture and sports. And so we really kind of went along for the ride, I think, once we signed up to be a part of this and figuring out what it would be. Even for me, you know, I spent so much time telling sources that I had worked with at that point for 14 years, saying, okay, so yes, I'm going to be doing this thing at ESPN now, but I'm still covering entertainment. And at the time, I was really, you know, in some ways trying to force it, but I was really very much like, I want to hit on all three intersections. You know, I want to hit on race, sports, and culture with everything that I do. And it actually ended up being an easier thing than even I thought, because sports, as I guess I learned this, even though it was something that I always knew, it was just I was probably made more aware of it, is that it's such like a unifying connector. And in particular with Black Hollywood, there's always some interesting connection with sports that I didn't have to necessarily force. And because it was something that a lot of the talent that I had spent years talking to never really got to talk about in other places, because it wasn't necessarily relevant to, you know, much of entertainment Hollywood and entertainment journalism Hollywood community, that it made sense for us to say, oh, we can talk to Denzel Washington about how he gave up a walk-on basketball scholarship at Fordham to go full throttle with theater. Maybe that didn't make sense, you know, when I was at USA Today, but it absolutely makes sense to have that conversation at ESPN.
So there's certainly a major social awakening within our country right now. I mean, this, you know, the Undefeated is really at the forefront of that. Can you talk about what it means to you to really have this platform to discuss this racial injustice that's going on?
It's pretty special. In the context of not just me or not just anybody that I know, but in the context of the platform existing at all, you know, it's a privilege to be able to speak upon it in terms of, you know, my personal informed journalistic opinion. But for me, I look at this as sort of a vessel situation. You know what I'm saying? I know where I'm from. I know who I know what I represent. It's one thing for me to talk, but the reason why I do it, the reason why I say what I say, is because I understand where I'm coming from. And that accessibility on its own is not something that, you know, when I first sort of got into this business, I ever necessarily foresaw as a space and as a voice that anybody was going to want. I would have presumed we would have been forcing it. And not to say that we're not kind of forcing it on some people now. I mean that in the kindest of intellectual ways. But my point is that, like, you know, if you told me when I was a little kid, like, yo, you're going to get to grow up and talk trash about being Black on TV, like, I'd have been like, yo, nah, that's not real, you know? And now it is. And so for me, it's much bigger than anything I could say. You know, it is a testament to all the people that have done all the things up to this point that have allowed people to even look at humans like me. Like I said, I don't wear suits. This is what I wear, you know, when I'm on the street. This is what I wear when I'm on the camera, and people kind of take me seriously on some level. And I mean, I'm sort of being flip here, but my point is that the Undefeated to me is a culmination of a lot of different works, and for all of the fantastic talent that we have that contributes to what we do, to me, this is, you know, what a lot of people have done getting to this point, you know. And in 2020, that's just manifested itself in a way that, like, yo, thank God we did the work, and thank God this all happened, because if we didn't have this voice, specific humans aside, I don't know where we'd be. You know, people text me all the time, people email me all the time, you know, young Black boys and girls, young kids of color who are just like, yo, thank you. I don't know what the hell I would watch if it wasn't for y'all. And that to me means way more than any rating or any, you know, props or anything like that, you know. So that's kind of where it is for me. I'm just, you know, I'm trying to build these blocks so these other kids know how to do it too.
Yeah, and you know, for me, because I'm interviewing, in my case, entertainers, performers, producers, directors on the show, a lot of times I think that this is a really uncomfortable time for a lot of those same people to talk about and promote projects that they did before, you know, we really kind of dove into this very national and really global conversation about systematic racism in 2020. And so I think that they feel uncomfortable, you know, then coming on and say, hey, I have this great sitcom that's airing. They would much rather use their platforms to really kind of address head on what's happening. And I think the great thing about the Undefeated is that I think that and I don't think it's just myself, I think it's my other colleagues, like, and Clinton's other colleagues, like Mark Spears, who's our NBA reporter, and Jason Reed, who's our NFL reporter, who are also interviewing, top NFL talent and top NBA talent, is that we provide a comfortable couch for some of the world's most famous people to come and have those conversations. And I really think that that's what the strength is in the Undefeated, is that, we have people on staff who can bring in, people like, Alicia Keys in my case, and talk about, the Zoom call she had with Breonna Taylor's family and how that conversation then launched. Cardi B was on that call, and Cardi B suggested, why don't we say, do you know what happened to Breonna Taylor, and tell her story? And we ask all of our friends to amplify it on their Instagram, and then it becomes a really big viral moment. Well, Alicia Keys felt comfortable coming on the Undefeated to talk about that because, again, we provide that comfortable couch. We let people know, hey, we don't have to talk about the same things that you're talking about, that you feel obligated to talk about with every other journalist. You can come here and we can have a real conversation about what you talk about at your dinner table privately with your family, because that's kind of the space that we've created here at the Undefeated. And I think that's really what we do so well.
Can I jump in there? Say something in that, which is that, Kelley mentioned Mark Spears, Kelley mentioned Jason Reed, Kelley mentioned herself. I didn't come to this place as a veteran like them. And that to me was a voice and a level of understanding that was very important in terms of what we were doing overall. You know what I'm saying? I knew that we had a lot to learn. And by we, I mean me and my people in terms of my network of community in the journalism world. And that was as valuable as anything. I don't want people to look at outfit as something where it's like, yo, it's all experts, it's all this and all that. Like, no,
right.
Different things in a lot of different spaces, and we're all learning from each other. And what she's talking about, that couch, that's something that people like me come to the table and drawn upon, without taking from and learn from. And that, as far as not just my personal professional experience, but as far as what people see, and as far as us working together, I think has been valuable as well. We come from a lot of different places doing a lot of different things. I think that's as much a part of showing our Blackness in terms of the multitudes and the diversity as the actual journalism itself is the interaction, like I described.
Nope, I agree, Clinton.
Yeah, I would say, many of us on the call, we've joined diversity and inclusion teams or participated in cultural conversations in our own organizations. I mean, you said it best, Clinton, we're getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and it's not the best of places to be, but that's what needs to happen. So Kelley, you mentioned, we've seen the professional athletes band together. It certainly was noticeable during the NBA bubble, encouraging action and spark dialogue. I think a lot of the athletes themselves had conversations, I believe, with Breonna Taylor's family. Can each of you share something positive that has emerged in the past 8 months, that whether it inspired you or it makes you look forward with hope?
After you, Kelley.
Let me think.
I mean, I can go. You know what I'm saying? I can
I can go. I think that honestly, I've been inspired by the honesty, and I've been inspired by the activation. I can remember being on my college campus and things were happening, like at Michigan State at the time. The community, the progressive community, was fighting to make sure that MSU granted domestic partner benefits for everyone. So, that was one of the big fights that was happening on campus when I was a student reporter. And also there was a great boycott because the students in Mexican American student group believed that where MSU, they were getting the grapes from, they were using pesticides that were harming migrant farm workers. But at the time, the really big conversation in the midst of these two very big social justice issues was that it felt like the student group, thusly, my generation, was very apathetic about what was happening and not really invested in the things that the mighty few were kind of fighting to make happen. And I think that I've kind of carried that because, you hear that from the generation before you, like, well, we marched on Washington. What are you kids? What are you slackers doing? Right. And so I think for me, seeing people who are my contemporaries that have these elevated platforms that work in entertainment, being so, activated and inspired by the incidents of 2020, and really making sure that they're pushing for change has felt very inspiring to me. And I truly love, quite honestly, being able to have that conversation with people now, because it's a different way to talk about entertainment. It's a different way to talk about someone's platform. And I really appreciate it as a journalist, but I really appreciate it as a citizen, and as someone who wants to see, change. So I really have loved seeing that.
I think to that exact point, in terms of somebody who wants to see change, and somebody who recognizes that things are different these days, in a sort of weirdly paradoxical way, what 2020 has allowed me to do is to let a lot of other people know that, like, yo, we can have fun, and it's not irresponsible, and it's not messy, and it's not at a cost of anybody else. So when I think about a Kelley Carter who writes about entertainment and who can weave that back in terms of why it means something to us without threatening anybody else, entertainment is the active word there. I think a lot of people forget about that. And that's one of the things that I feel like at the Undefeated, I try to highlight. It's like, yo, like, we like this. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're trying to live. Like, the goal here is positivity. And I think sometimes, because it makes a lot of white folks uncomfortable, quite frankly, to think about the notion of what it takes for a certain level of equality to exist, it's often forgotten that, like, yo, we're trying to have fun, man. We're trying to live. Like, like, I turn on my TV and watch it, and I laugh, and I have a good time like everybody else. And that doesn't mean that when I turn it off that I forget about what happens, but it means that everything that goes into that is a part of what I try to explain. Like, here's how you get there, and it's not all bad the whole way. And I know that what people look at looks daunting, and there's a lot of obstacles in between, but I sort of feel like, yo, if I can make, I had a good time. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in DC. It was murder capital of the United States of America. Like, if you grew up when I was born, where I was born, your life expectancy was 25, straight up, and I'm going to be 40 next year. So for me, my goal is to indicate to y'all, yo, we're staying alive. Like, it's okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're here. Like, we're trying to do it the right way. And that's, I think, something that 2020 has allowed us all to really understand is, like, yo, we're worth listening to, and it doesn't have to be combative. It doesn't have to be a whole thing where everybody's rejudging sort of who they are. And if you need to do that on your own, that's fine. But, like, for me, it's finally being heard. And one of the best parts about being a professional journalist is that when you are finally heard and you have something to say, hopefully people listen. But more importantly, you have the right thing to say because you've done the work of your community to inform yourself and thus inform others. And that, to me, is what 2020 is about. Like, yo, we got a seat at the table, and we're not blowing it. And that's very, very important.
Yeah, that's very impactful. Before we kind of shift gears and talk about innovation, I'd like to encourage those who are joining us today, if you have questions for Kelley and Clinton, please type them into the chat feature, and we'll make sure that those get answered in a little bit. I mentioned kind of innovation and kind of being a first mover is super important in our business. However, what we found is that people all have their own definition of what innovation means. Could be something that's never been done before, or it changes how we conduct business. Can you talk about how you've weaved innovation into your storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, kind of the biggest example of that is launching this show. We launched it during COVID, not really knowing what it would be, but knowing that we just wanted to do something. Sports came to a standstill, so I felt very responsible to really kind of amplify and elevate like what was happening in entertainment, because as I found myself explaining to a lot of people that I work with at the Undefeated, entertainment is far different from the world of sports because it's not live action. There are entire TV series that have been shot a year and a half ago that haven't even been announced yet. You look at something like Netflix and you see how well Netflix has done in the midst of the pandemic, and now you're saying, Disney Plus, like with the Hamilton, bringing that to, pulling that up about a year and a half in advance. And so anyway, I just thought there was a real opportunity for us to take advantage of what was happening in entertainment while there was a slowdown in sports. And it's really worked out well. And I think that was probably like the biggest, innovative thing that I've personally been a part of. that we've been able to do at the Undefeated, and it's been pretty cool, and it's now become its own thing. So much so I haven't even really written, except for I wrote a piece when Chadwick sadly passed away. But other than that, I have not written at all during the pandemic because I'm too busy talking now, like Clinton. So it's a different world.
To me, the largest innovation in this industry that's been impactful to me is the democratization of voices with social media. It's fascinating to me how you can literally just get an opinion from anybody on anything, and some are ridiculous, some are from nowhere, but some are not. And for all the bush beating we had to do back in the day, calling people, like, you think I've called anybody on the phone in the last 5 months? Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? That's not what we're doing anymore. The general accessibility to everybody that you're dealing with has allowed for the amount of information that you work from to deduce and share to get larger, and therefore your message is smarter. That to me is, I don't know if I would like this business as much if I did it 30 years ago, because you just wouldn't be able to talk to many people. And that's kind of a big draw for me. Is like, I don't care about being cool. I mean, that's a fun part, but what I care about is hearing from a lot of people. And that to me is easily the best innovation that's happened, is that we can all touch each other, and that for everybody to be a little bit smarter, because the level of accountability goes up when we can all touch each other and we can all hear each other. So that's what this was.
I like that too.
Yeah, certainly accessibility. Obviously, having both of you here today helps. Definitely there's no question that this pandemic has caused significant disruption in our world. I think we've been counting in our house, and we're at like day 221 in terms of since we entered into this family bubble, if you will. But certainly we've seen it with live sports being on hiatus and the creation of the NBA and Major League Soccer bubble. So flexibility and nimbleness, whether it be in your house or if you're in a bubble, is key, right? Especially if athletes are testing positive and you're pivoting then, or games happening, are they not happening? Can you talk a little bit about how ESPN has pivoted during this unprecedented time, especially with shifts in programming?
So I'll take this first because, dealing with a lot more live sports, this was something that was a huge deal for a lot of people. And if I'm being quite frank, I feel like it was a serious gut check, emotionally, psychologically, and quite frankly, intellectually, to a lot of journalists in this business, because the question became, what are you doing here? They're not playing ball. Do you have anything to say? Which was a very difficult question for a lot of people to answer, and a fair one, because I think it also kind of got at the sort of meta level of what we were all doing. Like, why the hell are we here? Do I really want to watch guys put a ball in a hoop if they're going to potentially spread a virus? There were a lot of questions, and I think that one of the things that ESPN, at least on the programs that I'm on, tried to tried to allow us to communicate was that this doesn't all have to be good, and this will work out in the context of we're not going to, come to blows over this nonsense, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, like, speak your truth. And I know as somebody that, Kelley talks about how, the actors, and therefore what you see on the entertainment screen is a little different. When you know the athletes, it's kind of the same thing. And I was not shy about it. I'm like, yo, man, when guys who are playing minor league baseball are calling me on my phone, asking me what their club is going to do with their minor league players because their club isn't communicating to them, like, yo, that's real. And there's nothing I can do about that is like an opinion on the virus or anything like that. That's just reporting what's actually going on. And the reason I say that is because I feel like at the very least in journalistic responsibility, ESPN gave us the freedom to talk about what went wrong and talk about what might not be the easiest, because we know how it goes when it goes well. That's what our network does the best. Serving sports at all times in all places is what we do. But when things don't go well, are we allowed to discuss it? Are we allowed to discuss why? Are we allowed to bring up how it's affecting people beyond just between the lines? Well, we were, and I have. And I'm not some negative worrywart. I'm a pretty positive person. However, part of that positivity is understanding what you have to do in order to make things right. And I've just really appreciated the fact that we've been able to do that, because not a lot of networks have done that. A lot of people try to act like ain't none of this happening. And you're like, yo, well, I mean, that doesn't even make sense. Like, what kind of information are you giving to people if you're going to act as if 2020 isn't real? I'd like to believe that ESPN, no matter what people might believe about what any singular person thinks, has been pretty real about the reality of the sports world, which is, yo, man, we're trying to do this, but like, it's going to be hard. So here's what you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what Clinton said. And what I would add to that is that I feel like there are kind of two major chapters you have to talk about when you talk about 2020. You have to talk about the global health pandemic that shut down sports. And then you have to talk about, you know, what the world was like in the aftermath of George Floyd. And I think ESPN, if we were trying to figure out what we were doing, you know, with the global health pandemic and how that was affecting the world of sports, kind of got a new kick in the butt when George Floyd was killed, and the activation that was inspired by what happened really kind of gave us a new conversation to have about a very old problem that we were still trying to figure out the best ways to have a conversation about it before 2020. And I think that it's given people like Clinton, I would imagine, more freedom to be very authentic in the conversations that he's having when he is on, you know, sports shows talking about what, you know, why, you know, a tennis superstar would come wearing a t-shirt with Breonna Taylor, you know, on it, or why they would choose to spend their moment of victory talking about the carnage of what was happening in the States. And so I think, you know, they're kind of two very succinct chapters and different and massive chapters in 2020, you know, to kind of talk about the spring and the summer. And I think that that's really probably the big thing for me.
And to build on that positivity point, you're talking about Naomi Osaka. Some of you might know her man, YB, you know what I'm saying, Corday. You know, he's a rapper, and like, but he's also a dude. And I remember tweeting about this very specifically. I thought so hard to myself, this is the most 2020 thing ever. Like, they were talking about this dude just as her man and like what they were as a couple and as like two young Black people who motivated each other in so many different ways in life. And I was like, yo, is Chris ever really talking about this in a Grand Slam final? Like, that doesn't happen in other years, and that's important. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Part of that positivity that I'm talking about. You know, as much as she might wear masks, that being made to discuss what's going on in terms of the streets and what's going wrong, her man is still right there cheering her on, because this is ultimately what we're doing. We're trying to have fun. The rest is an obstacle, but you know, we've been able to express all of that in the same space in 2020, and that's, you know, I guess that's what we take away from it. That's obviously proud.
Yeah.
And that's a great example of, you know, definitely her using her voice to keep that subject matter to the forefront. So let's talk a little bit about technology and how, you know, certainly technology has just infiltrated the sports and the sports marketing landscape. Definitely from a coverage standpoint. We talk about what we did with the draft. So 600 cameras were sent out to players' homes, or prospective players' homes, I should say, to try and capture that emotional moment. The pace of change is incredibly fast, right? And you have definitely seen that in the last 8 months, no question. How do you guys stay ahead of the curve as journalists?
I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest with you. So before the pandemic, I like bought a house and I just finished renovating it. And now, I mean, this is all I do is I kind of look and see what I need to do differently. But I say all that to say, the room that I thought I would be enjoying, this room that I'm in right now and kicking it with, has now become this home studio, you know, and I have so many lights and cameras and tripods and stands, and I just got a whole new you know, suitcase of equipment delivered to me last week that still I'm in the midst of setting up and figuring out how to use.
I'll come help you. I can help you set it up.
I'm gonna need some help. I have like an ATUV whatever system here, and yeah, it's like, it's wild. And so we're like FaceTiming with people in Bristol trying to help set it up. It's a whole new world because, you know, our studio here isn't open for us to go in to do TV the way that we normally would do those things. So instead, I have to be my own like IT person and figure things out. And of course, like in the middle of all of this, my my Apple book that I do everything on, including, you know, shoot shows on, malfunctioned. And when I, you know, kind of panicked and called our department for help, they were like, it actually is probably quicker if you take it into an Apple store. And I was like, hey, so we're in the midst of a global health pandemic and the Apple store is actually not open. So they were like, oh yes, that is a thing. So, you know, so now I had to figure out some new technology with this new computer that I'm working with while we're waiting for that one to come back from the hospital. So, you know, it's just a whole new world for me. And I feel like every day I'm getting a new, you know, app for voiceovers or a new, you know, app to do TV. I've done TV via FaceTime or Skype. It's just a whole new world right now. And I feel like it's constantly evolving. So yeah.
I'm pretty lucky because I have a brother and sister who are in high school and college. So I just lean
nice.
You know what I'm saying? When it comes to whatever the next stuff is. And I kind of mean that very genuinely. I'm like, yo, like I'm on all the apps, you know what I'm saying, in terms of social media, but like I keep up through people that are not me, you know, and I mean that, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of what the fun part about this job is being able to follow other people and see how they teach as a way to show other people a path to find themselves. And that's a little bit of what I've been trying to do in terms of like, I'm not going to act like I'm the most technological person in the world. I was technologically cool in the 90s and maybe the 2000s. Your boy is out of that nonsense. If it doesn't work on my phone, I'm getting pissed off immediately, you know? And so like, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand what the purpose of the different communications is, whether or not I'm necessarily using it. I know that Facebook is different than IG in terms of the messages sending. I understand the purposes of Snapchat versus, you know, anything else. And I try to stay abreast, not for the purposes of, you know, like I said before, being cool, but for the purposes of understanding other people's messages. That's what it is to me. And so, like I said, more technology means more voices, which means smarter globe, so I'm never going to be mad at it, you know.
A good approach. We're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. So joining us today, we've got some people who are kind of new in their career journey. So you guys both had a vision on where you wanted your journeys to go. Some may have started a little earlier than others. What advice would you guys have for those who are earlier in their careers and how they can kind of take their own unique experiences and turn that into their own vision?
Well, my advice would be number one, be yourself, because nobody can do that better than you. And I mean that for the purposes of honesty, because I feel like there was an era in journalism where that was not allowed. And I think Kelley knows a little bit about this, you know what I'm saying, where you had to mute a certain part of yourself in order to present a certain piece of information for the purposes of storytelling, and that has flatly changed. But what it has changed is also means that if you bet on yourself, you better be pretty good, kid. You know what I'm saying? Like the traditional avenues of just relying on structure and form aren't there anymore, you know? And so to me, the journalism business has changed a lot, you know, not just in terms of opinion, that's too small of a cubbyhole in my opinion in terms of the concept, but in terms of personality. And yo, if you want to bank on your own personality, I just hope your personality is good, you know, and I'm serious, you know, and that's the thing I would, if you're going to do that, cultivate it. Don't just expect people to walk in the door and like you for who you are. Nobody who you see on TV, who you think is acting like themselves, walked in the door necessarily acting exactly like that. Some of us have, you know, but a lot of us knew what it took in order to make it important that our voices be heard, and we didn't just walk in acting like, okay, you have to listen to me just because. And so that is what I would advise, is that make sure you know what you're talking about. It's pretty basic, you know, and it doesn't necessarily have to take a long time if you're smart, but it does mean you have to do the work, whether it be for yourself, whether it be with other people, you know. So yeah, you know, do the work, and then the personality will show, not the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think authenticity is definitely key. And even for me personally and professionally, I mean, that's how I was able to kind of carve out my own piece of the world. You know, when I first got to Detroit, I was the youngest person in the entertainment features department. I was the only woman, and I was the only Black person or person of color, period. And at the time, and I definitely feel some kind of way about this now is I'm a little older than I was when I started the Free Press. I mean, I really kind of leaned into my youth, and I felt like I was bringing something that my colleagues weren't able to bring to the table. I kind of jokingly, I guess, back then said it, but now it feels like an attack when I say it to myself personally. But I used to say, like, I'm probably the only person that, you know, that listens to WJLB when I'm driving home on the way from work, and everyone else is probably listening to the classical music station and warming up milk. I was a horrible 21-year-old when I was saying these things. But what I was really trying to communicate is that I had my ear tapped into different entertainment interests that my other, you know, colleagues did not have. And so therefore I was bringing different stories to the table. And I think that's really what kind of set me on a path of being, you know, kind of this authoritative voice in Hollywood, but also this authoritative voice inside of Hollywood too, when it comes to talking about women and people of color and the same types of things that this industry is trying to reckon with, that quite frankly every other industry is trying to reckon with as well. So I think that authenticity is key.
Great inspiration piece for sure. Another question that's come in is, as a journalist, how do you choose between the right message and the story that sells?
I mean, for me, I've never once in my entire career said, let me write this story because this is the one that's going to sell. Like, I'm not that kind of journalist. I think integrity for me is everything, and it's like foundational for who I am as a journalist. And I really have always played by the rules, and I'll continue to play by the rules of integrity when it comes to this journalistic life. So for me, it's all about the best story, and it's the story as I see it. I think one thing that's a bit of an untruth that we talk about in journalism is that, you know, you strive to be unbiased, but the truth is that there's no such thing as being unbiased, because to be unbiased means that you don't have a brain that is thinking, and that you don't have a perspective that you come from. All of us have perspectives that we come from, and all of us see the world in very unique ways. And I think that that is a very honest way to talk about journalism. And I could give so many different examples where I've had with colleagues at different newsrooms where we are talking about the same thing, and I'm blown away by how they see the world versus how I see the world. So I think that's important to kind of know going in, but understanding that even if understanding that you have biasness about how you view the world, you have to figure out how to filter those things when you're reporting, so that you don't sound like a jerk or an asshole or racist or insensitive or whatever the case may be. And I think for me, it's really just tapping into human emotion, because that's something that I always look for, especially as a writer. I want to make people feel like they are inside the room that I'm inside of. And I want to make sure that I'm really kind of painting a full picture. And I got this quip from a writing coach years ago when I was in Detroit. And basically he said that he wants subjects to feel like, to get this level of intimacy with the subject, that they can tell you what it is that they're praying for when they are saying their prayers at night. And I've just always carried that with me. Like, I want to get that level of intimacy with a subject that I do too. So that to me is what I look for when I'm telling a story. I never once think like, oh my God, what's going to be the big blaring headline, the National Enquirer headline that's going to sell this story? Because that's, to me, that's not how journalism works. So.
Personally, because of my natural personality, I'm a little bit arrogant, I'm a little bit loud. So to me, it matters. Don't matter to you. I mean, that's a personal personality quirk that I allowed to inform how I learned about a lot of other things. The addition to that is that I'm a naturally extremely curious person. So even if I'm going to tell you, hey, this matters to me and it's interesting, it's because I pay attention to way more shit than everybody else does, you know? And so that's kind of, you know, where I am. I look at this as much a responsibility as a privilege. And people ask me all the time, like, yo, what's going on with this? Like, Kelley knows how it is. You see people on the street, people be asking me all kinds of questions about, like, what's going on? You got to have an answer, you know, because that's what you're there for. And to me, that comes down to the concept of cultivating your own news judgment. And that is where the communities that we've discussed in the journalism world become important. Who you've been, not necessarily mentored, that's a little bit too much of a singular word, but who you've been cultivated around allows you to understand what matters versus, you know, what's going to sell. And the cool part about the job, I think, and I think a lot of people start to recognize this once they get to a certain part in their career, is when you know, and you don't have to ask yourself, like, yo, this matters. And once you get to a certain point where you can feel that, I think the goal is not assuming that just because you care about it, that it means that it matters. They're two very separate things. And that's kind of the fun part for me. I know what matters, and I know what I care about. And some of the things I care about matter, but, you know, most of the things that I know are going to be important, it's obvious to me. I'm a grown man at this point, you know, and I grew up in America too long that I know the difference. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be here. So I have to trust myself at this stage, and I don't have any problem doing that. Whereas 10 years ago, I don't know if I trusted myself the same way.
So we're going to end today's session with some quick fire questions. Say that 3 times for both of you. I'm gonna have you guys just blurt out the first thing that comes to mind. So, what is the last show you binge watched?
Schitt's Creek.
Cobra Kai. I've been watching Cobra Kai my face off. I love this show.
No.
Both good choices. I love Schitt's Creek.
Schitt's Creek, favorite show. So good.
So good.
Of the year, yeah.
If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Ooh, to be invisible. Because then I could be everywhere.
My superpower would be to be, how do I say this? Is gonna sound weird, to be able to regenerate my own health. I don't need to stay alive forever. I would just want to be in top shape for as long as I was there.
Okay. And then certainly we're in Detroit, so I'd be remiss if I didn't answer, although I know one of you are going to answer this a certain way. Tom Izzo or Juwan Howard?
Come on now. I'm insulted by that question.
It's
Izzo all day.
About Michigan. How you going to step in Kelley's zone like that? That's not.
Listen, it's Izzo all day, but I will say this. And my God, I need for none of my Spartan brethren to be angry with me. I was in high school when the Fab Five were in college. And my dad was he worked for a long time as a basketball coach at Detroit Henry Ford, and he had a lot of really great athletes come out of that program. One of them was Maurice Taylor, who went on to play for University of Michigan. While U of M was recruiting Maurice, we went up for the Michigan State game. And I made everybody wait so that I could meet Juwan Howard because I actually had a crush on him. Tom Izzo. Tom Izzo.
First $100 million player in the history of the NBA. I remember that because he's the Wizards back when I was a friend. Here's the deal, though. Michigan State, better program. Michigan, sorry, Kelley, better uniforms. Everybody knows that.
Not everybody.
Well, Big Ten football kicks off this weekend, and I know we are definitely excited about that here. So,
yes.
Well, in closing, on behalf of our Adcraft Board of Directors, I'd really like to thank both of you for joining us today. This has been a fantastic conversation over the last hour. You've given us a lot to think about in terms of the social awakening movement, how do we move the ball forward, the path that you both have had, and certainly the power and impact on sports culture. So thank you very much for that. And we'd also like to thank those of you who are at home joining us. And this is kind of the last of our Tuesday talks in this series. We're going to be shifting gears to our agency spotlight series starting actually this Thursday with GTB and Global CEO Robert Gay. We'd love for you to join us. Registration closes tomorrow at noon. You can still register at adcraft.org. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.